this legacy is built upon the Project Apollo era and the triumph of management in particular. It's said that James E. Webb, the NASA administrator at the height of the program between 1961 and 1968, contended that Apollo was a management exercise. So today we continue to celebrate everything that has set us up for and continue to move forward as we look to explore the universe. Let me take a moment out to introduce my amazing panel for today, and then they will take some time and introduce themselves and a bit about what they're doing. So I'll start with Dr. Edward Hoffman here. He is the former Chief Knowledge Officer of NASA and also one of the founding directors and advisor to the Project Management Institute. I have Dr. Adriana Murray, who is here joining us today, the founder of Proudly Human, as well as some other roles that she'll be discussing. We have Dr. Moses Adoko, who is our Chief Knowledge Officer currently at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. And we have Boss Thalen, who was the program manager for the European components of the Orion space module. So let me go over to you first, Dr. Hoffman, to introduce yourself and a little about what you are doing and have done.
Yeah, well, I got fortunate. I got into the family of space and exploration and aerospace somewhat accidentally. I was doing studies at Columbia University for my doctorate in leadership. What does it take for teams and people to come together? I had an opportunity to do an internship at NASA, and I found the people, whatever they were working on, whether it was computer software or if it was engineering, I thought the people were the coolest group of people that you'd ever work with. And I started working with international stuff, and I thought this is where I wanted to be. You have a blending of expertise and knowledge and relationships, and that's largely what we did at the NASA Academy and at the Knowledge Office. How do you help the folks working on these missions work effectively together, have the tools, have the knowledge, and have the probabilities of being successful for the challenges that are there? So it was all around learning and development in a wonderful community. That's what I did for 33 years at NASA, and I've extended that for a number of years at the Project Management Institute.
Right, and those years' experience are invaluable. Even like you said, starting in the internship role and kind of moving on. That's amazing. That's amazing. Thank you for joining us today. Let me go over to you, Dr. Adriana.
Thanks, Kenneth.
Yep.
Yeah, I have a background in quantum physics, so I was born with a belief that somehow I would participate or observe our expansion beyond Earth. And in the 1980s, growing up in South Africa, that didn't exactly seem like something that was around the corner. However, now I feel like it's a really exciting time for space activities, of course, with a number of things on the horizon. So from quantum physics, I was drawn back into space and looked at the origins of prebiotic molecules in space. Excitingly, the Square Kilometre Array Radio Telescope, which is under construction here in South Africa, where I am now, will be playing a role in looking for these kinds of molecules. So that's just an example of how a passion you have as a child you can come back full circle to that idea, even from something like quantum physics, taken straight back to space, thinking about the potential detection of life beyond Earth, which was more from a research perspective, but that's taken me now to interest in how living in space will impact the living beyond Earth, let's say, impact the people there. So we're looking at collecting data from crews, really setting up camp from scratch and living in extreme environments, and how this data can be used to, produce knowledge on team selection, infrastructure design, etc. But let me not talk too much. Thanks. It's great to be here with you all. A real honor.
Definitely gonna save a few surprises for our conversation today, but quantum. I have such a deep respect for that field. Let me jump over to you, Dr. Moses.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and I want to seize this opportunity to say good evening to our audience, ranging from the Atlantic coast of West Africa all the way stretching into the East Africa zone of the Indian Ocean, all the way into South Africa. Good evening to all of you, and thank you for having me. I'm currently in my role, I'm the Chief Knowledge Officer for the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center here in the United States. And in this role, simply, I have to make sure we meet our commitments. What does that mean? That we embark upon mission success. What does that mean? Develop spacecraft within cost, schedule, managing risk, and of course, achieving all our technical requirements. This is how I'm connected and related to project management. I'm also a volunteer for the Project Management Institute and serve on a couple of the African think tank in terms of shaping project management practice across Africa. So good evening. Thanks for having me.
Definitely. And you say it so modestly. You say simply, this is your role to make these big accomplishments, right? So let me thank you for your introduction. Let me pass it over to you, Mr. Bas.
Yeah, my name is Bas Telen. I'm Dutch. My background is in aerospace engineering. But very soon after I started working, I found out that actually most problems were not really technical. They were all human topics, really. So I had a very quickly an interest in project management, and found out also that when projects become more complex, the whole topic of human interaction, the teamwork, the leadership becomes more and more important. So I found that a very interesting challenge, and have therefore strived to have ever more complex projects, and been fortunate enough to actually lead some of those projects. The last one being the European Service Module. It's the European part of Orion, which with the Artemis 1 mission was a very, very satisfactory event, I would say, in my life. And after that, in Airbus Defence and Space, I joined headquarters, and they're responsible for project management and PMO, development, learning, certification.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And so today, again, thank you to the audience. I see a few people kind of trickling in as we talk here. So again, today the panelists and I will share our views on how project management as an art and science has evolved over the past 50 plus years. What makes projects and project management, and how does it differ from operations and general management as a whole? We'll dive into the roles of a project manager, dividing it into what it entails, some of the characteristics, the attributes that make project managers stand out as a whole. And so without further ado, let me jump into the first question here, and I'll point this toward Ed. How has project management evolved since Apollo 11?
Wow, a lot. Well, it's first of all, we'll look at what's happening here. You know, Apollo was largely, there wasn't a lot of countries involved in it. It was somewhat of a competitive mission. It was largely a male population. It was, they were young, but it's grown. And I think what's taken place is, I was listening to some of the things. If you look at the four people we have here, I'll include myself. Impressive people, knowledgeable people, you know, wow, that kind of a background. If you randomly selected another four people from Europe, from Africa, from the United States, you would get equally impressive people. And that's because what space exploration, where we are from Apollo to Artemis to Orion to all the places we're going, requires deep knowledge. You have smart people, you have passionate people, you have people, all different areas, not just engineering, all different areas. So knowledge is constantly having to increase because it's so difficult to do this. And then the other thing, which is much enhanced than ever before, is relationships are utterly important. I believe I heard Bas saying, and I jumped on it, that you know, this is largely about people. It's profoundly social, because to collaborate with different backgrounds, different languages, you need to respect people, you need to appreciate people, you need to break bread and eat together and do these kinds of things. So Apollo was a very different time. Where we are today is about global collaboration. It's about over 100, you know, countries have aspects of space. It's about knowledge. It's about digitalization. It's about fundamentally the ability of humans being smarter and also building on collaborative relationships. So it's a very, very different world, and and from that standpoint, a very improved one. I think you're muted, Kenneth.
Kenneth, you're muted.
Sorry, sorry, there it is. I think I accidentally hit the button. So I agree with you. I think you hit the nail right on the head there when it comes to people and how things have changed a bit. And I'll say one thing, and I want to pass it over to you, boss, just to continue it a bit. But taking your hand off the pulse of the global climate right now, when you think about international problems that the world faces from either political standpoints or things like that, we've known that space it kind of almost plucks itself out of that environment in times, because we have to collaboratively work together, like you said, across the board, to work with these different groups of peoples, backgrounds, and cultures and things of that nature. So I think you and Boss were speaking to that a little bit. So I want to hear from you just a little, Boss, on the question of how it has evolved since Apollo 11, and we are on the cusp of the Artemis program and that going even further into the universe. So over to you, Boss.
Yeah, I mean, I was new to human spaceflight, say 7 or 8 years ago. And one of the things that I immediately noticed was a very extreme speak-up culture. Yeah, and it took me a while to get used to that. And it's by meeting the people that had been through the accidents that NASA went through, yeah, amongst others the space shuttle accidents, that I came to understand why that was. Yeah, so the thing is, you have this one launch, this one event, and that makes part of our space business so unique, because anything can go wrong at that very moment. Yeah. So interesting enough, tens of thousands of things have to be right to make a success, but only one thing needs to go wrong to have a failure. And in this case, you've got human beings on board, not on the first mission, but certainly on the second. So, and that implies that the whole topic of teamwork becomes all the more important. The whole topic of really character, in terms of understanding as a project manager that you're only as good as your team. I understood from Ed that the NASA, the Apollo era was unfortunately also characterized by quite a lot of divorces. I think that has become a lot better. It's still challenging, but we have far more attention and interest in human beings that play that role. Rather, I think that that's one of the main changes in comparison with Apollo.
Great.
So,
Dr. Moses?
Yes, if I may come in. So we've seen increase in complexity in terms of systems development since the Apollo era. And it's an interesting challenge to have. Apollo did what they did, fantastic work, put a man on the moon and brought him back, basically. But then they did that with a limited set of technology. If you look at some of the technologies that were available for that impressive accomplishment, it will blow your mind. Fast forward, we've seen this robust increase, almost exponential increase in technologies. So system complexity has gone up the roof. And so being able to manage that kind of complex systems development effort without a well-structured, proven set of tools, it's just impossible. This is where program and project management comes in and offers us a discipline that is backed by research and a body of knowledge to apply that kind of systematic step-through structured approach to that development effort in order to manage the complexity. I mean, we are on the threshold, we are right on the eve of quantum technology, quantum computing, name it. And Kenneth, I know that's a hobby of yours, that's an interest of yours. But without having a system, a discipline, like program and project management, closely aligned with systems engineering, it will be impossible to pull that off. And so project management is really at the forefront of helping us to advance to the next level of our civilization as human species. And I'll stop right there.
Yeah, I think, and Boss spoke to this a little right before you, Dr. Moses, was that everything has to go right, right? One thing wrong can be catastrophic. And
Yes.
the Artemis program and the Apollo programs kind of show us that. And as an example of missions that have, you know, multiple points of failure, but we weren't concerned about human life, was the James Webb Space Telescope that just went up. Multiple single point failures on that telescope. I won't get into that because that's not the conversation for today, but that is a comparison of, you know, the types of different projects that we work on. And what you just talked about now was how the Apollo missions was, let's call it, almost a golden standard when it comes to project management. So the agency did what we thought was impossible at that time with limited schedule, limited budget, limited resources. And so by today's standard, the project had, you know, accomplished these amazing goals. So from a project management point of view, what skills at NASA and other places keep projects in flight mode, I'd say? Let me ask Adriana. And I'm getting a little...
So, Kenneth, who is this question directed at? Anyone, any of us, or is it
anyone can answer? I'd be interested to hear from Adriana.
Yeah. So let me flip that question a little bit and perhaps say, what have we learned from the agency that will be applicable to the African continent in terms of project implementation? What will be of interest? Because this agency or the space sector has learned a lot since Apollo. And we've been able to help to refine the project management discipline. But the African continent and the African countries and project practitioners across Africa are ready to step up in terms of project implementation. Now, there is a little bit of, so how do we migrate the lessons from Apollo, the lessons from International Space Station, the lessons certainly from James Webb Space Telescope, making it relevant for application on the African continent when it comes to project implementation? Let me get a little bit more specific. When it comes to things like schedule management, when it comes to things like cost or costing, when it comes to risk management, how do we do that? And I think that's the interesting challenge to have, because there's so much that can be learned, can be applied from these two fantastic, especially International Space Station and the Apollo mission. I'd like to kind of flip the conversation a little bit geared towards that kind of an angle.
Thanks, Moses. I could comment further, yes. Perhaps to take a broader perspective again and say one of the big shifts since 1969 is the human population, which has more than doubled. I just Googled, it's 3.6 billion or so back then. We're now over 8. So this is a big shift. And if we look globally, which we now do, partially due to developments in space exploration that have enabled us to have satellites, etc., and a global communications system that enables us to speak of our planet as one global society, we need to then on the larger project that we're also managing, which is our planet and our society and our impact as a society that we are having on our life support system that is currently our only life support system here on Earth. And I take this back to what Moses was talking about now in terms of what, how can space exploration in a very broad sense, maybe beyond the project management, positively impact, lives in Africa on the ground. And a parallel which is very clear to me, and I'm sure to many of us here, but maybe not spoken about enough, are the parallels between the extreme environments that we find in space, whether that's the space station or in the future on the surface of the moon with permanent populations there, even more excitingly on the surface of Mars. When we look at the way that we'll need to manage resources in these environments, this has direct implications and applications for the way that we manage our resources in increasingly extreme conditions here on Earth. And I often say, I love an extreme environment and a challenge, and that was why I would go in a heartbeat to be part of the team to go to Mars. But sometimes I think, in fact, the most extreme place in the solar system is Earth, for sure. The complexity, the challenges that many humans face on a daily basis, billions of humans without access to reliable power, to clean water, to clean air, to nutritious food, to safe shelter. I mean, these are very basic challenges that we haven't yet solved. So let me wrap up because I can go on for hours on this. I think the developments that we've seen in space technology, including power systems, I mean, where would we be without the solar power technology development that was essential for space exploration today when we finally realized we need to stop burning fossil fuel? Where would we be without the water filtration systems, the air filtration systems, without the LED lighting for growing hydroponic food in close, small spaces, small volumes? You know, these are the truly powerful technologies that have been developed for space that we need to think about implementing on Earth. So further more than just a resource management strategy for Earth, for managing things like power, water, food, and communication systems, on a larger scale, we need to reflect at our culture and what we would like our culture to be and how that would look in terms of a resource management strategy. You know, is our current economic system the best way to deal with resources on a single planet? You know, then we get, and let me wrap up now for real, it's really exciting to think what kind of economic systems may emerge for Mars, for example. Okay.
So we could keep going forever. I think this complex issue is a multi-headed beast. So I think we have to eat the elephant one bite at a time, right? And so when it comes to the resource management strategies, when it comes to thinking about us from a cultural point of view, I think that is 100% what we need to be focused on. And again, even when we get there, there's going to be additional conversation to be had about what's working, what doesn't work in those regards to continue and facilitate to push us even further. Mr. Boss, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'd like to hitchhike on what Ariana said, because I think it makes absolute sense. And to make it very concrete, I mean, to some extent, human spaceflight is like project management on steroids. Yeah, but the basic principles still apply. It just makes it extremely concrete. Yeah, you have a human being that you typically know who puts his or her life in your hands to be launched to the moon. That's very extreme. But the examples that Ariana just mentioned are no less extreme. It's just, it may be, in some ways, a bit less concrete, a bit more abstract. Yeah, because you don't know that one person that is having the problem with water or with resources. There's so many of them. It's not so personalized. But the principles still apply. They are exactly the same. Yeah. And as Moses just said, the project management principles, same thing. Yeah, I mean, of course, going to the moon is pretty extreme as an endeavor, yes. But some of the challenges that we are facing as a planet, I mean, I do consider Orion to be easy compared to that.
Yeah.
Sorry, something to add, Dr. Moses?
No, so I think I spoke for, so maybe Ed, if you have something to add, and then
I mean, I think, look, I'm very positive, but my belief is if we believe in the people that we bring on board to work in the different countries and the different organizations in the industries around space, then we do great things when engineers and project managers are told what they can do, what the opportunities are, and we give them the autonomy to a certain extent. I think the key challenge is always, how do we work together? How do we collaborate? I would always say to NASA people, give me 20 NASA people in a room. If we want to do something, we can do it. If we don't want to, we won't. And that's expanded when you have an international community of, so many nations and so much expertise. So it's the human ability to trust each other. It's the decision to take the risk of saying we're going to do something that is hard. And this is harder than Apollo. What people don't sometimes think, Apollo had more resources than any program or project since. There is a story, I don't know if but it kind of represents it, that the president of the United States, John F. Kennedy, was asked for what would this cost. He saw the estimate of the financial person from NASA, he crossed it out and he doubled it. And he said, this has to be successful. You will never see a project like that. You will give them a budget and then they'll cut it in half and say, do it for that much. So it requires agility. It requires the ability to do things cheaper, and it requires collaboration across the world. So it's different when you have all the money and you can go towards individually than when you have to work as a community. And if we want to do that, we'll do it joyously.
Yeah,
And I think
so
that's
you touch on something that goes right to the heart of the title for this conversation, which is the art and science of project management. The science, we can pull it off. We can teach. You can learn the science, but the art is the difficult part. And you're touching on leadership. Bas talk about trust, collaboration, getting people from different regions of the world. Using Africa as an example, coming from different parts, different countries in Africa, is a big challenge. We have all these organizational, cultural kind of barriers in terms of our processes and how we solve problems and how we see the world. And all of this gets in the way. But there was another word that was used by Bas that is so powerful, which is trust. He used that example of trusting someone. Sit on this rocket, and I'm going to launch you into space. And you're looking at that and trusting that person. That's a powerful illustration of the word trust. You're literally putting your life in the hands of someone. You're sitting on top right of a rocket. So what we learn from that kind of an analogy, it means project management has a lot to teach about leadership, about collaboration, about trust, and how to bring people together to literally confront some of the worst, some of the most difficult challenges ever to confront human species, which is the climate crisis and some of the challenges on the African continent that Adriana touched on eloquently, and rightly so. And most of the time doesn't get enough press. But some of these solutions are hidden. They're literally hidden within project management practice. This is my little push, by the way, as a PMI volunteer. How do we get this again for application, not just within Africa, but maybe around the world in areas where they're needed? Simply settling on the book of knowledge, PMI book of knowledge, at times we have to go a step further in getting this as to in units that they can be applied on the field. And I'll stop right there for others to chime in.
I'm sorry, my echo. What are some of the, because we talk a lot about trust and collaboration and an international kind of perspective on things. What are some of the vehicles we've employed in order to share those lessons learned across these different agencies? You speak about Africa a lot, we speak about what's happening in NASA, but from an international perspective, what are some of the vehicles that we're utilizing in order to make this happen?
I'd quickly say tell stories. One of the things we're doing right here is you have 4 people telling stories. You know, humans, we sit around, right? Our ancestors around campfires. What do? They told stories. We watched movies. We tell stories. And the stories of Quantum, the stories of Orion, the stories of what you're doing in your career, Kenneth, that motivates people. And I think that's one of the ways that we learn is we talk to each other. And it's better if we can do it together when we're eating dinner and when we're drinking. And one of the things I wrote is how do we build our collaboration in so many different time zones? I think that's one of the great issues we need to be looking at. Is how do we trust each other when we're all around the clock? Because we're used to doing it coming together and eating and breaking bread and talking to each other. But one of the ways we learned is just by sheerly telling stories.
There's a flip side of that, though. I mean, because we tend to present things now in a positive manner, and that's okay. But trusting somebody, also trusting the right people, also implies not trusting the wrong people. And that implies hard choices.
Yep.
That implies taking people away from certain jobs. And I know I've made my own mistakes with that, waiting too long. It does imply, sometimes publicly, addressing the wrong type of behavior, which does not fit with that way of working. So it's I mean, you can do the PowerPoint presentation, you can read the books, and it sounds all quite logical, but to actually do it is sometimes very, very hard.
Yeah.
And once again, it's like I'm the last one to judge about the situation in Africa. but I can just imagine the number of stakeholders that you have to align. It must be horrible. The number of people that you have to listen to. And interesting thing is, they're all right. That's one of the secrets as well. The other person is right from their point of view. Yeah. And if you want to solve conflict, you have to understand that that other person has a good reason to present that way of thinking, to look at it that way, to get angry. Getting angry usually is a good sign for the fact that people care. When I have people in my team getting angry, to some extent I get interested. Because there may be something there. Yes, the good people typically, they're not easygoing. Because they care about what they do. They have convictions. They have experience in order to defend what they believe in. That's just in my corner of the world, so to say. How you project that on everyday life when it comes to such big challenges as you're talking about, I do not know that.
We talk about the passion behind our work. Adrian, I see your hands up. Or Dr. Adrian.
Yeah, thanks. I think this fits in with what Bas was saying, and also some other points. So let me talk concretely about a project we are working on. So my very good friend and the founder of the Foundation for Space Development Africa, soon to be Dr. Carla Sharp, has been the African program leader for the Square Kilometre Array Radio Telescope. And based on her activities there, has her brainchild is a radio telescope on the far side of the moon. So the way that we have created the team for this, and first of all, let me preface this by saying I'm not aware, and while we have an audience and all of you here, I'm not aware of any African projects to send technology to the moon. Or beyond. Of course, 100 countries now around, which is around half of countries have a satellite or some part ownership of a satellite. But when we look at the crew that are in the space stations nowadays, and when we look at the proposals for even technology missions to anywhere beyond Earth orbit, so the moon, Mars, etc., I'm not aware of any African program proposals to do a project there beyond Earth orbit. So what we are doing at the foundation is without any preliminary budget is creating a collaborative-based team. So this is one way to establish who is on board with the vision and who is prepared to put their time, effort, and resources into the project without any immediate reward. And that's a tough way to collect a team. We are riding in good faith here, hopefully all the way to the far side of the moon. So far we are shortlisted with China for the Chang'e 7 payload collaboration to have our radio telescope delivered to the far side of the moon with that mission. We currently shortlisted. And our total cost remaining is $300,000. So the way that we have proposed such a project is through innovations, through the engineers that are working at the Square Kilometre Array Radio Telescope. So we have coil antenna positioned within 54 balls. And this array of coil antennas inside inflatable balls will bounce after deployment some meters above the ground into a random array. And in analogy to the Square Kilometre Array Radio Telescope, this array of antenna coils will then perform the role of a radio telescope, hopefully performing new science in the 3 to 20 megahertz frequency range, which is only visible from the far side of the moon. And this is the proposal, so let me not talk too much about that. You can find more information online. So, I'm both extremely excited to gather those in Africa who are prepared to collaborate on this to do what I understand to be Africa's only proposal to put technology beyond Earth orbit. But also, it's a tough environment to work in there, as you've said. The different parties that you need to get on board, whether it's the South African Space Agency or the African Space Agency, trying to get collaborations between these large entities is tough. But our main effort and mission is to inspire. So each of the 54 balls that represent each of the African nations, we plan to have cohorts in each country monitoring. We want to have classroom live feeds of the balls landing where they land, the science that's done. We're going to open all the data. It's a project to inspire the next, for the sake of the next generation of dreamers. Africa can't afford to be a relaying station for future space exploration missions by the traditional players in the space industry. I will put a stake in the ground there and say we cannot afford to be signal relayers any longer. Yes, geographically we are happy to do so, and we are busy constructing such a station in South Africa right now, but we need to move beyond that. It's both exciting and a bit worrying to me that we seem to be the only players doing that. So let me not go on. But if anyone here would like to collaborate or can share any more information on other African missions, collaboration is our our driving force. That's at our heart, is collaboration and inclusivity, and to share the inspiration that comes with putting such a thing like a radio telescope on the far side of the moon.
Impressive.
And I think I echo that sentiment. That is impressive. And you say talking or the initial steps could be a collaborative based team to talk to those facts, like Boss was saying, about the passion that goes behind these programs that you actually work on. And you said I'm muted. Am I unmuted now? Can you hear me now? Okay, yep. There we go. Sorry. So let me start from the beginning there. So first off, I echo the sentiments that is very impressive. You talked about one of the first activities that we could do are collaborative based teams, and so that we can, what Boss was talking about in terms of determining the passion that your team has for projects, that they're showing those emotions when it comes to solving these problems and when it comes to being involved in these missions. But you touched on a lot of important stuff, but let me touch on one of the last things you said in terms of inclusivity, and how do we increase inclusivity from countries' perspectives in terms of different backgrounds and cultures and things of that nature. As project managers, and as we continue to expand upon these missions, how do we touch and expand on inclusivity?
So let me jump in. So there's a healthy tension that often, when this conversation comes up, that we have to explore. When you're about projects, when you're about mission success, when you're about project success, you have a target. You have an anticipated outcome of that particular undertaking. After all, the basic definition of a project is that it has to have a beginning and it has to have an end. And you have a set target that you want to achieve, right? So when we bring up these kind of very, very useful topic of inclusivity, there are about two primary drivers that feeds into that. You have to have the right skill set in order to be considered for inclusion. I think often this piece of the conversation is missing. It will be unfair on the project manager to push or to be someone to be pushing inclusivity on the project manager when the skill set isn't necessarily available. So I've heard a lot of project managers often express this sentiment. I want to be as open as I can, but I need the right skill set. I need the right mix to achieve my target, and I'm not getting it. What should I do? So we have that also feeding into it, kind of bringing up the level of complexity in addressing that challenge, that question. So anyway, that's all I want to say for the sake of time for others to ping on. But this is really important. Yes.
Yeah, on that one, what I find is, at least perhaps in our case, is that when you want to create a certain way of working, yeah, you look for people around you that have gotten the message, that understand the way of behavior, the way of problem solving, the way of teamwork. And what we found is that especially younger people were more eager, so to say. Still, as you say, they don't have necessarily the right skill set. The thing is, Airbus Defence Space is a big company, and we have some very, very experienced people as well. So if you team them up, you can achieve both. Yeah, you can achieve the younger ones with the energy, the drive, the passion, and also sometimes the willingness to take certain risks. Yeah, and the more experienced people to help to find the ways, and those are typically also the ones that don't want to do all the project management stuff and the detailed schedules and the resource planning, etc. But the combination, I found is very powerful. Yeah.
I think you also need to extend it beyond. Sometimes we get into the notion of, I never liked the notion of STEM. I like the notion of STEAM. STEM is the science, technology, engineering, math, essential. STEAM adds the arts. And there's a role. Sometimes the most important person on a mission is the budget person, the person who knows how to get the money, how to talk to the politicians, how to find the funding, how to, I mean, we may not think of them that way. A lot of the roles, you know, in terms of what we're talking about has to do with learning and development. What are the competencies? When we started doing the stuff at NASA, the first question I would get from a lot of the people is, well, what are the competencies I need to do that? So I think you could look at inclusion on different levels. Certainly one, you could look at it at the society level. What is our government, what is our society committing to do, and why is space so important to shoot, to do these kinds of things? I think at the organizational level, from industry, from government, again, being very clear of what are the capabilities we need. We need more people in these areas. And then I think it's creating those kinds of feeders with universities and internal training programs to start preparing people to get there. But people won't just show up, you know, in terms of trying to guess. They're going to want to know, how do I get to there? And that's where having a formal kind of a process, I think, is so very important, right? And I think that's where learning from these kinds of things, even beyond space. I mean, us and I have been talking about, you know, some of these concepts around a rocket university, rocket roundtables. How do you learn from the challenges of exploration, and how does that get applied to different things? But that includes people from a wide array of capabilities, communications people and budgeting people, as well as mathematics people and engineers.
Agree. And I think the concept of not just having bodies in seats is not what we want, right? We want the correct people in the room to get us over these complex problems, to get us to mission success, to develop, as we know in the Project Management Institute, tough and competent teams, right? And so some people see that as the true definition of project managers, to be both tough and competent, and that comes from the Kranz dictum following the Apollo 1 astronaut many years ago. I forget which year he gave that speech. So if you could, I guess this is a question for anyone, but if you could, what word or skill makes a more well-rounded project manager, and someone that would be on that team and not just a body in a seat? And that's a question for anybody.
Okay. Empathy.
Make
sure that the empathy is a bit of a soft word, of course, and I don't mistake that for agreeing with everything that happens. Empathy does not mean that there is no conflict. Actually, I believe that with empathy, you have more conflict, and preferably constructive conflict, because people will feel more comfortable speaking up. You split, of course, the topic from the person. But I would say empathy, in my view, scores pretty high.
Very good. Empathy. Anyone else? One word, either a word or a skill that makes for a well-rounded project manager?
I'll say being comfortable with ambiguity that typically surrounds a people organization. Essentially, as a project manager, your worst or your biggest challenge will be dealing with people. And you have to be comfortable. And people are ambiguous. Let's face it, they are not machines. It's impossible to have if anyone has a predictive model for people, please send it to me. It's impossible to model how people will behave. Even an hour from now, it's hard. So to be a good project manager, you need to be very comfortable with ambiguity that comes from dealing with people and people, period. And then, of course, that taps into the empathy and collaboration, and knowing when to also draw sort of a consensus and make a decision, and getting the team comfortable to move to the next level, right? So that's a critical skill set to have. And often that comes from the art. I still want to go back to our theme. That's hard to teach. That's really hard to teach. You know, good project managers will tell you, I had to learn this the hard way. I had a project manager once tell me, I literally wept meeting with a principal investigator because I realized how difficult I was. So it comes, unfortunately, it takes time. That's the art piece. But yeah, I'll stop right there. Those are some good elements for having becoming a good project manager.
I think you have to have. I mean, I agree totally. So I could use that. I think of having a good feel for a system. Mistakes are made the more siloed you are. Silos are usually good. It means you have deep expertise. But when you work with people who think their area has all the answers, now you have a problem, because by definition, what we're talking about is a global. It's finding the answers. It's working across the lines. And I would add one more. I would say you need a voice. People need to know what you're thinking, right? If boss is thinking something that agrees or disagrees with me, but I don't hear it, then I can't work off of that. And I think the best project practitioners, not just leads, project practitioners are noisy. They can be irritating, which is a good thing, because they're asking the right questions. Shouldn't we be doing this? Why aren't we doing that? And those are the places, if it gets those are the places that will be most successful. You have to embrace that noise.
Nice.
I like that. Noise and articulation.
Yeah.
Adriana, Dr. Adriana.
Yeah, so once we've put our radio telescope on the far side of the moon, and once I'm living on Mars, then you can ask me about how to successfully manage projects. Let me add something. So I think, the COVID era and lockdown has not been part of this conversation. Maybe finally we're moving away from bringing that into every conversation, but let me bring it back. So in 2019, I was doing location scouts to Antarctica, for example, and traveling a lot, ready to launch our off-world project, which would involve a group of experts arriving in an extreme place like Antarctica, setting up camp from scratch, and then living together as a community for a duration of time, where we collect data on everything, from facial expression recognition to urine samples, like everything. That was the plan. But come March 2020, I found myself in a completely different world. And so I would say humility is another important aspect. And let me explain the context briefly. By March 2020, I was living in a forest next to a river, in a wooden shack that my boyfriend at the time and I had built ourselves, washing clothes in a river, burning a fire to heat water for showering, growing food, not so much. We could still travel to the shop. But so we did our own off-world experiment in the absence of travel, in the forest, and we set up camp as a group of people would in an environment with no infrastructure, and then experimented on ourselves, basically, because of course the infrastructure is not really the question. It's how do you interact and engage with the extremity of the environment? How do you react to a limited set of resources available to you to act every day? And more importantly, how do you interact with the other people there? And our relationship did survive that 6-month stint in the forest, so a tick on that count, I guess. But it was a really humbling experience. So from, being in a jet, traveling around, doing different experiments, thinking about my project, to literally waiting for socks to dry after having washed them in the river, was an exercise in humility. And I think going back to basics, when a certain aspect of a very developed, sophisticated plan maybe doesn't pan out as planned, we shouldn't be afraid or ashamed to go really back to basics. That was just an analogy, but I think humility, in terms of not being afraid to go back to basics, is an important aspect to get something right.
Yeah, one small comment on that one. Not too long ago, I met with the gentleman Jim Free. And Jim Free is basically in charge of human spaceflight for NASA these days. And when his first principle when it comes to leadership is, and he told me last week, he said, no task that needs doing is below me. This is the number 2 in NASA. He makes that statement that basically, if it needs doing, then yes, it may be part of my job. And knowing him a bit, I genuinely believe that for him that is true. One of the most humble leaders that I know. So I think the topic of humility applies everywhere, from the experience that you had to leading big and complex teams. I think it's pretty vital.
Yeah. We even take it a step further. Something we call technical humility. When Ed touched on collaboration, And we've learned this. We actually have a couple of case studies on this. When you have, in some instances, leading experts, global experts on certain disciplines, on certain subjects, and you want to bring them together to accomplish a task, they need to have technical humility. And what does that look like? That looks more than simply being able to sweep the room or arranging chairs in the room. It goes into when your technical analysis or your technical submission has to make way for another person at a table to contribute, or for his or her voice to be heard, for a different model of tackling the problem to be examined, than simply pushing my way because I'm tagged as the leading global expert on this subject. So technical humility, it's a big attribute of sort of behavior dynamic that I will also table as essential, as critical for a successful project manager, or for that matter, for a team that want to embark upon a successful collaboration.
I think that's so important and so critical. Technical humility, and what you define there, Dr. Moses, is I think invaluable when it comes to developing your team and the skills that you need in that space. I do have more questions, but I'm getting flagged from our team here that we are out of time. But I will be opening the floor for questions. So let me take a minute to say thank you so much to our panel for this great discussion. We talked about the players that are involved. We talked about some lessons learned from the international perspective, inclusivity, some of the challenges that are faced and where we move from since the Apollo era as we move into this Artemis phase. So let me open the floor up now for questions. I think we'll be receiving them via the comments section. Anyone can speak up if that is incorrect, but I think the comment section is now open for questions, or we allowing people to come off of mute.
Okay, so this is Dorinda from Ghana. Mine wouldn't be a question, but I would like to just share briefly about what the project manager needs to do in order to build a collaborative team. So on empathy, it's so key to me because I believe that as a project manager, you have to go beyond being transactional you have to have this relationship with your team in order to understand their needs. Because then you can have a talented team, but if you relate to them on a transactional level and don't go beyond getting to know them further, then you wouldn't know what is impeding them to bring on their best. Because yes, I can have all the great talents, all the skills and all that, but if I don't have a good shelter at home, if I'm struggling with some personal needs, then I will not be able to bring out my best, because then so in order to create an effective environment or a good environment to bring out the best and help your team collaborate further, you have to go beyond being transactional with them and get to know them deeper and see how you can support them beyond what they provide directly on the project. That's what I just wanted to add.
Makes absolute sense.
And thank you for that. Any other questions from our audience? I think you can also raise your hand and I'm able to call on you as well if we have any questions. Otherwise, I'll have time to ask my last question for our panel. Let's see.
You had an earlier comment that someone who had said is, as we get smarter, as we technically advance, we lose the trust. And I think it was Clement, if I remember it correctly. And I don't know what my colleagues, you think about that, but the notion was, as we get smarter, maybe more diverse, not diverse, maybe separated by the time zones, we rely more on technology, it works against the trust. I think that's what Clement was asking. And I don't know, what do you think about that? I see you shaking your head, Moses, or, are we losing the ability to be more trusting because of an increasing focus on technology, or the fact that we're getting smarter?
Yeah, that was my question. Thanks.
Thank you, Clement. I would take a stab. Go ahead, Kenneth.
I was about to say, I think it definitely has an impact on interpersonal skills. I'd say just the fact of trying to work across lines in that way. But I think that in some ways, the recent pandemic almost set us up for that shift to allow us to pivot in that nature. I mean, space has always been an international field, and you always have to find new ways, like you said earlier, of working with groups in different time zones and accomplishing things like that. But I think it takes longer to build and develop that trust. And so that's what I would see as the impact to that. It would just take additional time to get to that finish line. And let me go to, I see Mike has his hand up. Sorry, it doesn't show me your last name.
Yes, that's Michael Semodi. Okay, so mine is a question to Rainer. Okay, so I would want to find out, are there opportunities for young project professionals like myself with limited opportunities, limited experience, considering the collaboration you want to have on the African continent? And if yes, what should we do to be able to take advantage of these opportunities? Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for the question. So maybe I should emphasize again, the way that we are collecting teams is via people who are able to volunteer their time and resources. So this probably doesn't sound very attractive to a young project manager. However, I would say practically at proudlyhuman.com, there's a contact form. So if you leave your email address there, I will share any updates with you on both projects. So I think at the moment we are at the stage where we are looking to get certain hurdles in place so that we can grow the team. And perhaps we need to get the person Ed mentioned earlier, I think it was Ed, the budgeting person who can enable the funders and so on to come forward. So we've done all the brainstorming and planning and designing. I'm a physicist and not a project manager, as you can hear. So drop us your email on proudlyhuman.com, and hopefully we'll have some salaried positions available at some point due to some funding.
We always need the money. Yeah.
Thank you for your question, Michael. I see Morgan S. Sorry, again, I can't see your last name, but Morgan S. has her hand up.
Thank you. My name is Morgan Sitole from South Africa.
Yep.
I just wanted to see how far, with all these prospects of moving technology further, now we're moving into the sphere of artificial intelligence. And in the sphere of artificial intelligence, there are issues which are getting into interplay between trust. Because at a certain stage, you have to get to a position where there's a higher level that unless you have some safeguards and regulations, it will be difficult to discern between trust and non-trust issues. And I see also project management is also focusing on moving a step further towards artificial intelligence. Well, how do you expect to handle these elements, which are diverse and also perhaps will actually cause a lot of problems in terms of trust issues? Thank you.
If I may, in that one. Yeah. So at the PMI Council 2 weeks ago, that question was asked to one of the gentlemen working at artificial intelligence with Google. And he basically stated that he doesn't understand why everybody's so worried about. From his perspective, artificial intelligence is nowhere close to take over the role of a project manager. Yeah, his view was that it was more in support of what the project manager's tasks. And when it comes to today, it doesn't matter whether it's systems engineering or project management. I do expect that a project manager or scheduler or system engineer understands the tools they are using, that they understand the input and the output, and whether what comes out is reasonable, yes or no. Yeah, and the thing is, you will hit the wall soon enough in case that is not so. Yeah, I have personally a very high level of confidence in the human mind to counter artificial intelligence or anything that comes close. You can see it now with ChatGPT. Yes, it is the most promising, fastest growing tool ever, understood. But you see also immediately counter movements coming into place, giving the right warnings. It will take some time. But it has always happened that way with previous developments as well. So personally, I'm not that concerned. At least not for the time being.
So if I may come in, this is also very similar to the challenge of a new evolution we call digital engineering. Started very slowly as MBSE, model-based systems engineering, and now it's become full-blown digital engineering. And it's a big deal. So the conversation is that going to replace that technology, going to replace engineers? And the answer is a big no. All of these inventions fall into the domain of tools invented by humans, all the way from the Great Pyramids to this eve of quantum technology, AI, machine learning. These are all tools. Now, if you decide to be so afraid or push back on AI, that's the zone you don't want to be. You really want to know, like as Bas put it, you really want to know the full capability of these tools, AI, what can it do and what can not it do. On the issue of the ethics, besides, in addition to its role replacing the project manager, the ethics, I'll put it, I'm also not worried, by the way, full disclosure, I'm not worried. And I think post AI, we are even going to have more revolutionary tools emerging. We are in a state of emergence as a civilization. So we should be ready for more fantastic things to be on the horizon. And at that point, the question is going to be, as human species, are we ready to come out with new ethics? How do we regulate these things? How do we live with these new inventions? And humans have always been able to, as Bas pointed out, we've always been able to address these challenges. Is someone out there going to abuse these tools? You bet. These are humans. But by and large, I will encourage all to embrace these tools, this emerging set of tools, whether it's in engineering, program and project management. Explore, find out what the capabilities are. But I don't think it's going to replace the project manager. I don't think so.
Agreed. Well said, Dr. Moses. I think so. My doctorate is actually in programmatic management, focused on MBSE. So speaking to the development of that tool, in particular of that genre of digital engineering, I think as a good leader, as a good project manager, you should understand the resources and the tools that are out there so that you can pivot more informed as you're making these decisions. So I think AI is going to be no different. I think there will be some good, there'll definitely be some bad with it. Like Dr. Moses said, it's humans. So you have to take it with a grain of salt, definitely there. I saw one hand up, but it went down. Okay, let's back up. I see Frederick A.
As a project manager, one thing I just want to add my voice to what a project manager must have and have more to get his work done. As a project manager, you have to pay basic attention to why you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. The reason God created it like that is for you to listen more and talk less. So you have to listen more with your project team, and be a team member but not a team boss, so that you get to know more about the people you are working with and get the best out of them. You have to listen more and talk less. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see Dr. Hoffman, you've been answering some questions in the chat. Anything in particular we missed that I can call out here, or have we got to them all?
No, I mean, I think we control the future, humans. I mean, for good or for bad. I mean, if we trust each other, then we'll move forward. If not, technology has been around in all different forms. It'll continue to be. We use it to make things better for us. But I agree with what's been said. I mean, the empathy is important. The ethics are important. the collaboration is important to make sure that there's the right playing field. All these things are human decisions. The fact that money goes to the right, kind of things, and a machine doesn't decide that, humans do. So I think we have to, it's very important that we take control. One of the things I learned as a psychologist is that, if you look at other things or technologies as having the answer, then you give up the ability to lead things. As much as we control, we take, and that to me, I'm optimistic about. Just listen to the folks here we're talking to and some of the questions where we're moving forward. So we benefit if we collaborate, if we talk together, if we take personal responsibility.
Definitely. I think we've had a great panel, some great discussion, great follow-up questions from the audience. Let me just do one final call for questions if anyone has them before I turn it over to George to close us out for some closing remarks. So last call for any questions in the chat or otherwise. And while we're doing that, again, thank you, panel, so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your wisdom on these topics. I'm sure our audience is very appreciative of it. I'm sure there'll be some follow-ups because I know you all are all on LinkedIn, so I'm sure there'll be some follow-ups from our group where they'll reach out to you. So let me turn the floor over to Mr. George Azamani and for closing remarks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Kenneth. Well, what a session. I think it's been great. So, Doctors Kenneth, Ed, Bass, Adriana, and Moses, thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge and experience. I think it's been phenomenal. It's been a real privilege actually to spend time in the same virtual room as 5 space professionals. Yeah, it's a huge privilege, and it's also somewhat reassuring to hear space professionals saying that we don't need to worry about AI. So that was good to hear. I do think we still need to work on make sure the ethics are in place. So, hopefully that does serve as guardrails. To all the listeners, I want to thank you for making the time to join wherever you're joining from, whether you're joining from Africa or outside of Africa. Thanks again for making the time. This day really is quite relevant for PMI Africa, not just because of getting the moon, and I say just in quotes, that's obviously a big deal, but it's really about the lessons and the skills that we can adopt just from this incredible feat of excellence. As we've heard from all the speakers in terms of what we can adopt, how do we use these advances in science for climate, for power, for water, for food, and all the various factors that are critical to our growth and even survival on the continent. I'd really love to continue this conversation, but of course, we're out of time. So what I would like to do is to challenge all the project managers on this call to do the unthinkable, right? To get to the moon, to lead, to collaborate, to trust like never before, like we just heard about. Break the boundaries. Let's get to the moon, metaphorically speaking, and think about what we can do to build the Africa that we want in the most profound way possible. If anyone's looking for information or would like to continue this conversation, please reach out to us at pmiafrica@pmi.org. That's pmiafrica@pmi.org. Also, the PDU for this event, it's in the chat, so you can look for the PDU code there. The Africa Conference registration is open. Also, the call for papers is open for anyone who's interested in presenting at the Africa Conference, which will be held from the 8th to the 10th of September. We've now come to the end. I just want to thank everyone for participating. Thank you also to the speakers. Really, really appreciate it. Have a good night, a good day, wherever you are, depending on where you are. So thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye.
Take care, all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed, Bass, and Kenneth.
Thank you very much. That was really enjoyable.
Quite interesting, and what attendance we had. A huge number of attendants. Great stuff.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
More good news, Bass, for rocket roundtables.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a great job, Kenneth.
Yeah.
Well Well done.
Yes. So,
Okay.
um,
Thank you all. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.